My name is Kendall Reev. I'm 36 years old, and I've spent the last 12 years serving in Special Operations Command. I've trained alongside NATO intelligence, coordinated drone strike strategy in Eastern Europe, and led mission briefings so sensitive they happened in windowless rooms beneath ground level. But none of that mattered the night my sister laughed in my face and said my job was cute. That night wasn't supposed to be about me. It was my parents' 40th wedding anniversary. Heather had planned the whole thing, the kind of black-tie dinner you'd expect from a woman who made her career turning ordinary spaces into photo shoots for the rich and bored. Her house glittered. Crystal chandeliers, imported candles, napkins folded into swans. I showed up in a pressed blouse and a bottle of Cabernet, already knowing neither would fit in. The moment I walked in, Heather's smile barely twitched. "Oh good, you made it," she said, her eyes flicking over my outfit. "Still keeping it utilitarian, I see." I smiled. Not because it was funny, just because I'd been trained not to flinch. Mom was already entertaining a few women from her golf club. She glanced over, nodded once, then looked back at someone's emerald necklace. My stepdad Richard, kind as he's always been, patted my shoulder and said, "Good to see you, Kenny." I hate that nickname. I've said it for years, but I let it go. That's the cost of showing up. I was seated at a table in the corner with cousin Marla, who talked about her yoga startup, and Uncle Pete, who asked if I ever got to shoot anything. Every time I tried to speak, someone else had a bigger story. Heather's client gala, Emma's recital, my promotion to major. Heather waved it away with a laugh. "Oh, Kendall's still in the army, mostly logistics, right? Reports and computers?" A few heads nodded, as if that explained everything. My mother actually leaned in and said, "That's still a job, honey." I swallowed what I wanted to say. It wasn't the first time I'd been reduced to a shadow in my own family. Probably wouldn't be the last. But I didn't expect him to walk through that door. Not then. Not in front of 35 guests holding champagne flutes. Not in full flight gear. I didn't expect him to stand at attention and salute me. And I certainly didn't expect the boy they all bragged about, the golden grandson they said would probably run the world one day, to say the words that would turn the entire room to silence. "Major Reev, ma'am, I was ordered to deliver this message in person." Every fork froze. Every smile dropped. And just like that, everything changed. I didn't grow up in a broken home. Ours was just imbalanced. My sister Heather was the light, the centerpiece, the chosen one. She was 7 years older and dazzling even at 10. Flawless grades, dance recitals, charity drives. Her face was on the fridge, in the newspaper, once even on a billboard when her high school featured her in a campaign for excellence. I was the quiet one, obsessed with puzzles, fascinated by maps, always in the background of Heather's spotlight. Our mother, Diana, adored her firstborn with a level of devotion that bordered on delusional. She once told me, during a Thanksgiving dinner, that some girls were made to lead and others were made to follow. I was 13. Dad, technically stepdad Richard, but the only father I ever really knew, tried to balance things out. He took me to air shows, helped me build my first telescope, taught me to throw a curveball. But when Mom's voice rose or Heather pouted, he faded into the wallpaper. By high school, Heather had already been accepted to an elite arts college. I got a partial scholarship to a state university for engineering and ROTC. When I announced I'd be enlisting after graduation, you would have thought I said I was joining the circus. Heather laughed into her wine glass. "You? In the army?" Mom frowned. "Isn't that for kids who don't have options?" Richard tried to defend me, but it came out half-hearted. "It's a noble path," he'd muttered, "if that's what Kendall wants." But it was never about what I wanted. It was about what made sense to them, and I never did. Boot camp nearly broke me. I wasn't the fastest, the loudest, or the most aggressive, but I could see patterns. I could anticipate. When everyone else sprinted forward, I found the blind spot and flanked it. That earned me a second look from a visiting intelligence officer. 2 years later, I was inside briefing rooms, analyzing satellite footage that never made the news. The battlefield shifted from dirt to data, and I thrived. The first time I was deployed, I emailed home once a week, sometimes twice. No one responded for the first 3 weeks. Then Heather finally replied with a group photo from a winery and the subject line, "We miss you." Sort of. I got used to being out of the loop. Holidays happened without me. Emma, Heather's daughter, started calling me Army Auntie. Landon, her son, asked me once if I flew the planes or just filled out the paperwork. I told him, gently, "I help the people who fly the planes stay alive." He blinked at that. He was maybe 12 then, skinny and curious, and already living in the glow of Heather's world. But there was something behind his eyes, an intensity I recognized. He didn't know what it meant yet, but I did. That's the look of someone who wants to understand more than he's told. The years passed, filled with missions I couldn't talk about, and losses I couldn't grieve publicly. Promotions came quietly. My rank changed, but at the dinner table back home, I was still Kenny, who hadn't settled down. Still the sister with potential, if only I'd just do something normal. At Heather's 50th birthday party, a rooftop event catered by some celebrity chef, I showed up in uniform. Not out of pride, but because I didn't have time to change after an emergency meeting at base. Heather looked me up and down and muttered, "Couldn't you have worn a dress? It's not a funeral." I stayed for 28 minutes, just long enough to be noticed, just long enough to realize I didn't want to be noticed by them anymore. So when I got the invitation, well, when Richard called to say they were doing something big for their anniversary, and that it would mean a lot if I came, I hesitated. Naomi, my best friend and teammate in intelligence, was the one who finally said it. "Maybe they don't deserve you, Kendall, but maybe you deserve to see how far you've come." She didn't say it with bitterness. She said it with clarity. Naomi had seen me pick apart intercepted signals that saved entire deployments. She'd seen me walk into debriefings with a laptop and walk out having prevented something awful from happening in a city no one could spell. She knew what I was capable of, even if my own family never cared to ask. So I said yes, but I packed light. Just one clean shirt, one bottle of wine, and 0 expectations. Heather's house looked like a catalog spread. White stone columns, manicured hedges, and a driveway lined with cars more expensive than my annual salary. I parked my rental between a silver Tesla and a black Range Rover, and sat for a moment, watching the string lights flicker across the windows. For a second, I thought about just driving away. But I didn't. I walked up with my wine in hand, buzzed the gate, and waited. The door opened like it was on stage cue. "Kendall," Heather said, her smile polished but empty. "You made it." Her eyes slid down my outfit, simple blouse, gray slacks, military ID badge still clipped on my belt. She didn't comment directly, but her voice had that sugar-slick tone I remembered too well. We went with a winter elegance theme. "Hope you're not too warm." I stepped inside and handed her the wine. "Cabernet. Thought it'd go well with whatever you're serving." She passed it off to a staff member, like it was a coat, and motioned toward the living room. "Everyone's here. Brian's around somewhere. Mom and Dad are already 2 glasses in. Come mingle." The place was filled with people I didn't know. Clients, neighbors, Heather's yoga instructor, probably. The family I did recognize was clumped in curated seating zones. Cousins with designer handbags, aunts comparing cruises, uncles making jokes about the market. Mom spotted me and gave the familiar once-over. "Oh, Kendall, you look rested." That was a code for "you've gained weight." Richard gave me a warm smile and a nod from across the room, but he was deep in conversation with Heather's father-in-law. No one seemed to know what to do with me. I wasn't glamorous. I wasn't married. I wasn't remarkable. At least, not in their eyes. Dinner was announced by one of the catering staff like it was a royal affair. Heather led the procession into the dining room, where name cards dictated social hierarchy. She and Brian, of course, were at the head. Mom and Richard beside them. Emma directly across. The Morgan cousins flanking both sides. My name card? Near the end of the table, between Uncle Ron, who once asked me if women in the army were allowed to wear mascara, and Cousin Elise, who worked in branding and had a lot of feelings about fonts. The food was, admittedly, incredible, something with duck confit and lavender sauce, but the conversation was a minefield. Heather held court effortlessly. Brian's resort project just got greenlit for Phase 2, she announced, clinking her glass. And Emma got early admission to Columbia. Full ride. Applause, smiles, toasts. Then, with theatrical humility, she said, "But it's not just about us. Tonight's about family. And we're so lucky to have Kendall here. Still doing, what is it exactly, Kendall? Military admin?" My fork hovered over my plate. "No," I said quietly. "Tactical intelligence. I manage operational briefs for field teams overseas." "Oh," she said, blinking innocently. "So, spreadsheets?" A few people chuckled. Someone made a joke about me being the real reason the Pentagon needs more funding. I took a sip of water. "Last month, my analysis prevented an ambush on one of our transport units. We avoided casualties." "Wow," Cousin Elise said, clearly trying. "That's something." Heather turned to Emma. "Anyway, we're thinking about a summer in Tuscany. You'd love it. Villas, wine, maybe a little hot air balloon ride." I tried to hold my tongue. I did. But the way she brushed past everything I said, the way she refused to see me? "Must be nice," I said, not looking up. "Some of us don't get summers off." Heather's eyes narrowed. "Well, maybe if you'd chosen a career that didn't involve sleeping in tents and following orders." Mom gasped softly. Brian laughed under his breath. I set my fork down. "I don't follow orders. I issue them, and those orders keep people alive." The table quieted for just a moment. Then Uncle Ron said, "Well, I think what Kendall's trying to say is that every job matters, even the behind-the-scenes ones." I stood up, suddenly hot under the collar. "Excuse me?" In the hallway, I gripped the stair rail until my fingers ached. I was so tired of the polite mockery, of the diminishing tones, of always being the invisible one. I almost didn't go back in. But I did. Not for them. For me. I sat back down and picked up my fork. Heather was laughing again, this time showing off photos from a fundraiser she threw in Manhattan, glittering chandeliers, celebrity cameos, and just as she leaned forward to brag about how she made the senator cry with her floral centerpieces, the doorbell rang. Heather frowned. "We're not expecting anyone." Brian stood. "I'll get it." A pause, a whisper, then footsteps, and then, "Excuse me, is Major Reev present?" Every head turned. I stood slowly, confused. I hadn't told anyone from base I'd be here, hadn't shared my location on social media. The voice had been male, firm, professional, but I hadn't recognized it. Brian re-entered the dining room, clearly flustered, and said to the room, "There's someone at the door, for Kendall." Murmurs spread like wildfire. Heather's eyes narrowed. "Who would come here for you?" she asked, like I'd summoned a debt collector to ruin her party. But before I could respond, a tall figure stepped into view, broad-shouldered, sharply dressed in flight uniform, every inch crisp and gleaming under the chandelier's light. It was Landon, Heather's son, 25 now, still lean like when he was a teenager, but more carved, more grounded. A presence. I hadn't seen him in over a year. Last time was at Richard's birthday, where we exchanged 3 sentences and a hug. Now he looked like a man I barely knew, and yet completely recognized. He stepped forward into the stunned silence of the dining room, his boots soft on the imported rug. In one clean motion, he snapped to attention and delivered a full salute. "Major Kendall Reev, United States Army Tactical Intelligence Division, ma'am. I was ordered to deliver a priority update. Apologies for the interruption." The room fell silent. Utter, choking silence. Heather's fork hung in midair. Mom froze, her mouth slightly open. Brian blinked like someone had cut the lights. The cousins were whispering. One of them actually mouthed, "Major?" I returned the salute automatically, my own hand steady, though my heart thudded like a war drum. "Lieutenant Morgan," I said calmly. I wasn't expecting a field dispatch. Landon lowered his salute and stood at ease. "Colonel Harrington asked me to deliver a briefing file in person. He said it was urgent and couldn't wait until morning." Heather finally found her voice. "Landon? Why are you... What is going on?" He turned to her, respectfully but firmly. "I'm on assignment, Mom." She opened her mouth to protest, but nothing came out. Then Landon turned to the table, his gaze sweeping across the smug faces, the disbelieving stares. "In case it wasn't clear," he said, Major Reev was the lead analyst behind Operation Kingshield. Her strategic read saved my squadron during a zero-visibility extraction flight last month. He looked right at Brian. "We were 3 seconds from being targeted. Her intel rerouted us through a safe corridor. We're alive because of her." Brian's face drained of color. Heather looked like someone had unplugged her entirely. I should have felt vindicated, triumphant. But what I really felt was stillness, a quiet, leveling stillness I hadn't known I needed. I nodded. "Thank you, Lieutenant. We can debrief outside." Landon gave a final nod. "Of course, ma'am." Then to the room. "Sorry for disrupting your dinner." He turned and walked out with military precision, and I followed, heels clicking behind his boots, the silence behind us thick and stunned. Once we reached the foyer and the door closed behind us, I exhaled. Landon loosened his shoulders. "Okay," he said, grinning. "That was dramatic as hell." I stared at him. "You ambushed me." "Naomi told me where you were, said your family was being themselves again. Thought maybe it was time someone showed them who you actually are." I blinked. "You called me Major, in front of everyone." He raised an eyebrow. "That's your rank, isn't it?" I swallowed. "It is, but you didn't have to." "Yes, I did." His voice dropped, softer now. "We flew blind, ma'am. That data packet you flagged? It rerouted us just before we hit a hot zone. That wasn't paperwork. That was survival. They needed to hear it." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a sealed envelope. "This actually is for you, though, from Colonel Harrington, briefing at 0700, but I might have exaggerated the urgency." I smiled, really smiled, for the first time that day. "Well played." He straightened. "You've got more people who respect you than you think, Aunt Kendall." He saluted again, but this time with a smirk. "See you at the base." Then he was gone, and I was left in the quiet entryway, holding an envelope and 100 unspoken words behind me. Back inside, they were still frozen in their seats, but something had shifted, and not just in them, in me. The next morning, I was back on base by 0645. The sun had barely cleared the mountains, and the desert air was sharp with silence. I wore my uniform not as armor, but as clarity. I didn't need to prove myself anymore. Not to them. Colonel Harrington's briefing was swift. New intel from the Syrian corridor, chatter patterns, satellite pings near the Turkish border. My mind clicked into place. Threat assessment, trajectory mapping, predictive analysis. It was work that mattered, quietly, consistently, without applause. After the meeting, I found Naomi in the corner office with 2 coffees. She handed me one without a word. I raised an eyebrow. "You told him." She smirked. "Landon reached out last week. Said he was tired of being talked about, not to. Figured he deserved to know the real you." I shook my head. "He didn't have to go that far." Naomi sipped her coffee. "You deserved that moment, Kendall. He just gave the room permission to see it." Later that afternoon, base security called. "Heather Morgan, civilian, requesting entry." I hesitated, then nodded. "Escort her to conference room B." She walked in wearing heels, a tailored coat, and no makeup. It was the most un-Heather she had ever looked. She sat quietly and folded her hands like she'd practiced the gesture. "I'm sorry," she said, "for all of it." I didn't respond at first. She continued. I didn't understand. I didn't try. I assumed your world was small because I couldn't see it. But it's me who's been small. Her voice cracked on that last part. It surprised me. I don't expect us to become best friends, she added. I just want you to know. I see it now. I see you. I exhaled, slowly. You don't have to get it, but you have to stop reducing it. She nodded, standing. I'll try. That was all. That was enough. A week later, I found a small package in my inbox. Inside was a framed photo, Landon and me, seated at the base cafeteria, both in uniform, both grinning. The note read, Thanks for showing me what leadership looks like. Lieutenant Morgan. I placed it beside the one of Naomi and me, taken during a field op in Jordan. Our faces dusty, our eyes bright. 2 reminders. Not of war, not of recognition, but of the quiet moments when the world finally catches up to who you already are. I was never the shadow. I just stopped waiting for their light.